Hello, my name is Chrissie Hodges. Happy OCD Awareness Week. We're going to do a video today live, myself and Stuart Ralph. So I need to bring him on. Give me 1 second. Oops. Here we go. Add. Sorry, it'll take me just 1 second. Here we go. I see him now. Here we go. Ralph should be joining us here in just 1 second, and he'll appear, I think, on the screen. We wanted to do a video for OCD Awareness Week, just the two of us talking a little bit about advocacy. Stu does the OCD Stories. I do a lot of videos and stuff in regards to OCD, and here he is.
Hey everyone.
I was like starting to sweat that wasn't going to work.
There we go there.
How are you doing, Stu?
I'm good. You?
Good. Well, I was just telling everybody I didn't really get to what I did, so I'll just tell everybody real quick, and then you can tell everybody real quick, and then we'll dive into some fun questions about advocacy, okay?
Let's do it. Yeah.
So my name is Chrissie. I do a lot of videos typically about the term pure O, which is the nickname for the type of OCD that usually has sexual, violent, blasphemous, intrusive thoughts with mental rituals. I also have a podcast that I do daily called Coffee with Chrissie. It's in the mornings. Sometimes if you're on the East Coast, it's going to be later in the mornings because I get up a little later sometimes. But it's just morning messages of hope for anybody living with mental illness. And lastly, more importantly, I am a peer support specialist for OCD and referral consultant. And I'm the author of Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. So, Stu, take it away.
Oh, you want me to introduce myself?
Yes.
Okay, so I run a podcast called the OCD Stories. It's been going coming up to 3 years now. The site's been over 3 years, which is where people share their written stories. And then nearly 3 years ago, I created the podcast just to interview kind of selfishly experts from around the world so I could effectively chat with them for free without having to pay their hourly rate, get the information. And then I thought, if anyone listens, then that's great, right? That's awesome. And then now it's kind of grown bigger than I thought it ever would. So that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's your story, and if you've probably heard this, if you've listened to me on OCD podcast or OCD Stories podcast, is I wanted to know Stu for years. I knew who he was, and I knew he was in the UK, and I'd listened to the OCD Stories, but we just had never obviously been in the same place at the same time because I'm in Colorado, you're in the UK.
Yeah.
And so a couple years ago, it was San Fran, I believe.
Yep.
I'm
2017.
I'm walking down the I'm going down the escalator, hurrying because I'm always late. And all of a sudden I see Stu going up the escalator, and we make eye contact, and I'm like, rah! And Stu is a little more reserved than I am.
A little more English.
So I'm like, oh my God, we need to meet. We need to, rah! As I'm like running away. And then we finally got to connect a little bit later, and Stu came out to the OCD Game Changers last year, and that's when I feel like became really good friends, and I have tons of admiration for what you do and just for you as a person. So
Likewise.
Yeah, so we're just going to talk some OCD advocacy today. Oftentimes Stu and I are doing our videos, and he's doing his podcast, and we talk about symptoms and symptom management, recovery, and I don't know about you, Stu, but I get a lot of questions about advocacy. So I thought it would be cool in OCD Awareness Week for us to chat about what it's like for both of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And just to throw in, the episode that is going live this Sunday, which I won't give too much away because I still want it to be a surprise, but you were the guest. But there was a slight twist to it. And in that, you and the other person talk about advocacy and how to be an advocate and some of the pitfalls and opportunities of an advocacy. So this also kind of a nice lead up to that, just plugging it.
It is. This is like advertisement.
It is.
I'll try not to repeat.
Why do you think I agreed to do it?
Oh, sad. Okay. Well, either way, I'm glad to be here. Okay. So these are just some questions that I think are interesting, but I also want to know from your perspective, not really how we got into advocacy, because I know we probably talk about that a ton, but how is advocacy different for you now than what you thought it was going to be when you first started out?
Good question. Man, I could easily answer it how it's different now than how I experienced it when I started versus what I thought it would be, because I honestly didn't think I was going in with any hopes or expectations, at least that I remember. I really just wanted to share information with everyone who was willing to listen, and that was it. That was my hopes, really, was just to interview some cool people and let me just make sure this is charging. Interview some cool people and I'm getting paranoid now. Oh, we'll go until my phone runs out. Interview cool people, and if anyone wanted to listen, that was awesome. And that was it for me. So I had no expectations, so I can't really compare my expectations to how it is now, but I can compare how it was for me. It was all new, it was all exciting, it was this big world, and everything was a challenge in a good way. And now it's still those things, but because I've got to grips with a lot of it, doing the podcast for 3 years, it's somewhat second nature. So, for example, the episode that's going live this weekend is my attempt to keeping it fresh and keeping people interested, and also keeping me engaged, because I don't want to burn out. And maybe that's a key thing in advocacy, is when you do burn out, that's it, you're done. When that candle, so to speak, is gone, then you can't help any more people. So me trying to keep it fresh is, I like to be creative, and that's how I keep me engaged, and then hopefully keep doing the work for longer, which is ultimately my aim.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you just joining, or when I post this on my YouTube channel, Stu is the creator, founder, and manager and everything else of the OCD Stories podcast. If you've not checked it out, please check it out. You will love it. Lots of great people come through there. I will answer the question of how it's different, but first I wanted to ask you, how is it better than you thought it might be?
I don't think I ever predicted the kind of connection that I get through doing it. The meaning, I've talked many times about Viktor Frankl and his book Man's Search for Meaning. He's obviously a Jewish guy in a concentration camp in Nazi Germany in World War II, and he, in that book, he talked about when you find meaning in suffering, in a weird way, it can no longer be suffering. And I completely relate to that. Having that weekly schedule forced me, no matter how I was feeling, to keep living by my values, to keep putting things out. It held me accountable when I couldn't hold myself accountable. And the connection, when I go to events, I was at Aaron's event for his Made in Millions launch, Aaron and Rose, on Tuesday night or whenever. And there was a couple of people that came up to me and said they listened to the podcast and shared their stories of how it's really helped them. And that there's no price that can be put on that, on how that feels when someone says that to you. And it's still difficult for me to accept it and hear it, but I try and accept it willingly. And I mean, how do you experience that?
Well, the better piece, how is it better? I asked this question, and now I'm thinking, how am I going to answer this? To be really honest with you, I never expected for my advocacy to be kind of overtaking like my actual career. Now, while that was a goal, I was, especially when I first got started, my insecurity was so rampant. It was like, oh, look, as long as that's always a goal, even if I don't reach it, whatever. So in reaching it, how is it better? Oh my gosh, the people I have gotten to meet around the world. It's sometimes I feel as if I really do feel like sometimes I don't deserve that opportunity. I struggle with that. Just the why me piece of how is it I deserve this? But yes, at the end of the day, the benefit is, oh my gosh, I get to meet people in all different countries, and even they teach me so much stuff about my journey, and I get to show them that that recovery is possible, and we get to share in that, in the good and the bad. That's what I love about it. And thank you for using that quote, that it isn't that the truth. It's the, I mean, I look at OCD, I don't love it, I don't want it, but the value that OCD has now brought to my life because of meeting people like you and the clients I work with worldwide, or even connect with over email, we all come together for the common suffering that we kind of only can only understand between all of us. It's, I mean, it's not really a private club I would pay dues to be in. The OCD VIP club, but at least we know that we're not alone, and that's what advocacy has brought to me. And that's probably, to answer the first part of the question, is what's different. I really did think I'm going to be able to talk about this and help people understand. My goal was, I want everybody to know what pure OCD is. I want them to know violent, sexual, intrusive thoughts. It's different because I connect more to people that live with it versus educating people, which I'd like to combine both at some point. But oh my gosh, it's so much more enriching to be able to connect with sufferers, because selfishly, it helps me and in my own recovery to see that I'm not alone, especially on tough days.
Yeah, no, I agree. Oh yeah, like you said there, for me, the whole stigma piece is a minuscule part of what I do, and not because I don't believe in it or think it's important, but it's not what I enjoy, right? And ultimately, if I'm not doing what I enjoy, going back to talking about the candle, I'm going to burn out again. So like this week, I've done several posts around raising awareness around stigma and how to treat people who are going through those types of things, and I've enjoyed it. But like, then I'm going to get back to but let's focus on recovery again. And if people want to learn what it is, they can, but that's not what I'm going to champion. But what you were saying about the people you've met, it's, yeah, the people I meet when I go to the various conferences, etc. Like, that's awesome. But also, you know, I feel like my wife and I were planning on going to New York next year, and it was like, well, if we go there, you know, we can meet up with Chris, we can meet up with Phillipson, we can meet up with I'm blanking. There's like 5 names that came to mind that I'd happily have dinner with and look forward to meeting. And Denver, there's like 80 people that I could go and hang out with. So I never would have thought that I would have so many friends in a different country. And obviously I've made friends all over, but a lot of the people I've interviewed have been in the States. And that's enriched my life so much, because you have an hour, 2-hour conversation with someone, whether it's over a podcast or at a conference or whatever, and you build some connection that you could be going to university with someone for 3 years or at work with them for 5 years and not have the same connection, because you've never gone to those places that really connect people.
So with that said, I wanted to ask you, we can both answer this. When you do connect with people who live with OCD, and I imagine you get a lot of emails and stuff in regards to the podcast and people reaching out, what is, and this will be tough to narrow down, but what is one of the most common questions that you get?
Yeah, that is a tough one. Common questions. A lot of it is initially when people they're very early on and haven't had any time to research or anything. It's often around treatment, and that would go with obviously ERP, CBT, ERP, which is part of that, and then it could also be, I've tried ERP and it hasn't worked, and that's often, and I've asked that several times on the podcast, and it often comes down to potentially the clinician wasn't trained enough, or was trained enough in ERP, but not trained enough in understanding all the subtle nuances of OCD. And maybe it's also the sufferer needs to understand the subtle nuances of OCD, and they haven't quite mastered that yet, because it is tricky. And if you don't understand all the little tricks, it can easily fool you. I'm trying to think of others. There was a question just now that I liked. Where was it? Stevie Lee? Well, thank you for the kind words and really good question. Yeah, the word recovery sticks for some people. And I get why, but for me, it's, I mean, yeah, the word cure, I don't like that. But
yeah,
the word recovery, so I know Steve Lee's put here, I believe in learning how to live with it. And for me, learning how to live with it and live a life of meaning is recovery.
It's recovery.
It doesn't, yes, it's just semantics here. That's what I'm getting at, which is, yeah, recovery doesn't at all mean recovery can mean symptom-free, which many people with OCD can have. And it just means it can flare back up. But you can get to a point where even if there are symptoms, you can still do the things you want to do. You can still, you know, have the children. You can still get the job you want. You can still, however you want to live your life, that's still an absolute possibility. And for me, that's recovery. It's living the life you want, whether OCD is there or not. That's recovery for me. And yeah, I know that word sticks for some people, so I just wanted to clarify that. And it really depends, because there's other people that would use the word recovery and they mean effectively cure, which is not what I get when I say recovery.
Well, and that's a great segue, because one of the most common questions that I get is it possible to live in recovery? And people will write to me and tell me their stories and say, do you think I'll be able to live in recovery? And I absolutely 100% agree with you. And I think it's worth clarifying. Recovery doesn't mean the goal is not to have symptoms. That is an unattainable goal for a high percentage of people. For me, recovery, and I say this often, especially when I'm working with people, recovery is the pivot point of, after getting an intrusive thought, making the choice between, am I going to do compulsions or am I not going to do compulsions? I get to choose that. And because that pivot point is right there, that's where I live in recovery. Yeah, there are some days I choose compulsions. And if people want to think that that means I'm not in recovery, I don't care. But for me, it's being able to live the life that I want to, and being able to stay a step ahead of OCD. Yeah. Sometimes I'm walking alongside of it and it's torturing me, but I know that I can always go back to that. It is a choice, and that's what I learned in therapy, and that's how I move forward in recovery. So, you know, obviously my answer when I'm working with someone is not to define their recovery. It is to help support them as they find out for themselves what recovery looks like for them.
Yeah. So my camera's gone all.
I know.
Do I still look normal?
You look normal. No. It looked like you were doing somersaults for a minute.
Okay. Oh, it's all right. Yeah. No, sorry. I think I'm back. My wife's showing me what she looks like on her camera. And yeah. Anyway. You
are straight up and down.
Basically, I'm horizontal right now on my phone, so it's going to be awkward. But let's do it.
Okay. So lastly, and Stu and I wanted to keep this short, around 30 minutes. But I think this is a great question. What have you learned about your own recovery after doing advocacy?
For me, cheesy as it is, knowledge is power, and there is an abundance of knowledge and an abundance of free knowledge. You know, I've spent the last 3 years recording hundreds, close to a couple hundred hours coming up of content with the greatest minds in the world on OCD. And I don't charge. I have a membership for extra content, but it's nothing revolutionary, that content. It's more entertainment. The informational stuff is all free. And it's like, listen to as much as that as you can. Find the episodes that resonate. There are so many great books. I don't want to name any because I don't want to isolate any of the guests I've had on. But yeah, they're constantly being pumped out. They're all brilliant. I recommend any of the books by the guests I've had on.
What about this one? Can you name this one?
Yeah, that one's all right. Um, and there's, you know, support groups. If you can't get a face-to-face one, also if you're in a position, if there's none near you and you're in a position somewhat to organize a little gathering, try and set one up yourself. Try and find a local clinician who's willing to dedicate an hour a week or an hour every other week to sit with you and run that group. It doesn't have to be a fully fledged support group. I run like a casual get together once a month, which is just basically a group of friends talking about OCD, and that's less intense. If you don't want to take on the full kind of, not hassle, but full effort of a support group, you can do that. And then the other part is try and do more of service in your life, and it doesn't have to be in the OCD community, although that's an obvious place to start. You know, the idea of helping out a soup kitchen, going to your local green space and just picking up litter. If you've got contamination, there's an exposure for you. Mm-hmm. You know, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be small. It could be going to an old people's home. It could just be going to see your own nan and granddad and just sitting with them for an extra 10 minutes more than you do and just asking them about their life. You see what I'm saying? Like, the more we can kind of push away from ourselves, the less time we have to get absorbed in ourselves. And that's not saying we're selfish, but if we're not occupied or not living a life of meaning, we're giving our brain opportunity to kind of go back into itself. Unless, of course, you're practicing meditation or mindfulness, in which case you kind of need to be somewhat alone with the mental vomit that's going on.
Thank you for the exposure with the V word.
Yeah, no worries. What about you?
And I think this is another surprising piece of advocacy that I did not expect. As many of you know, I do peer support, which is supporting individuals working toward recovery by using my lived experience. And the biggest thing I've learned is through working with other people and their absolute, you know, courage in sharing their deepest, darkest fears, and not just with OCD, but just the stigma stuff and the shame. And, you know, just the other day talking about how sometimes when we look back on parts of our lives that OCD is tainted, we have such sorrow and grief about what it should have been. And being able to hear people expressing those courageous things, and I go, oh my gosh, me too. That helps me to come to terms with my own recovery and the emotional piece of the recovery specifically. And I did not expect that. Not that I went into peer support saying, oh, I have all the answers, but I really didn't expect that I would learn and have such a symbiotic relationship with the people that I work with, or the people that email me and share their stories so courageously. So I would say that's been the biggest thing that I've learned about my recovery. And that, of course, funnels back into the I am not alone. You know, there's hope, and that on the darkest days, I can think in my mind, there are people out there right now that just get it. And even though I feel as lonely as I do right now, or as scared and symptoms, I'm not the only one that's experienced it. And that helps me to know I can push through and be able to work through it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's about it. We're right at 30 minutes. So any final words on whatever, you know, inspiring words or whatever to put out to the YouTube universe?
Yeah. Well, I guess an immediate call to action is, like I said, I don't focus a lot on stigma, but because it is OCD week, you know, let's finish it off strong. I think it ends end of Saturday. Mm-hmm. You know, if you want to for a start, no pressure, but just share something, maybe a message about your personal story on social media. You could anonymize it on a different platform. You could just retweet something I did, which would help me out, or share something I posted, or something Chrissie. You don't even have to. Exactly. You don't even have to identify yourself. You can just say, hey, this is interesting. Did anyone know that actually OCD isn't about being orderly or color coding things? Actually, it's an anxiety disorder, X, Y, and Z. So you don't have to make it personal. You can just use, yeah. And then the other bit is going forward is make sure your recovery is high up on your priority list. It doesn't necessarily have to be number one, but it needs to be high up if you want to get to a place of mental well-being. You know, and if that means cutting down on Netflix a bit because you know you have to read that extra chapter of John Grayson's book or Chrissie's book or Abramovitz's book, then so be it. You know, if that means you have to try and wake up a little bit earlier to go do that weight session or that run because you know that's going to help with your head a bit, go do that. You know, if you haven't called your therapist in a while, and you know you need to, or you haven't ever called one, but you know you have the capacity to have therapy, make that call, send an email, whatever it is. You know, basically just take that little step and then keep taking that little step. And as Lao Tzu says, you know, little by little man walks far. I think it's that simple. It's not easy, but it's that simple.
And just kind of echoing what we were talking about, kind of my final words of hope would be, again, recovery is different for everybody. So sometimes in watching a video like this, you may see myself that does a lot of advocacy, Stu that does a lot of advocacy, but don't be fooled that just because we do advocacy doesn't mean we still don't actively manage OCD every single day. There is a lot of stuff out there on the internet that says, I was cured from OCD. I just be very wary of that. And that doesn't mean that you can't get to a place where maybe you have no symptoms, but everybody's recovery is different. And especially with OCD, we tend to compare ourselves to other people. And I do it too. I absolutely do it, even in regards to OCD recovery. So just so you know, your journey to where you get to a place where you're managing OCD and it does not dictate your life, but you dictate your life, and maybe OCD is along for the ride, it's completely personal. Sometimes it takes 1 month, sometimes it takes 10 years, who knows? But for me, the rest of my life is the journey through recovery. There is no finish line. And so I hope that you will hear that moving forward, that I know that when you're having symptoms, it comes with an urgency to just want them to stop. But OCD is a lifelong journey. And like I posted today on Instagram, follow me out, Pure OCD or Pure O Chrissie. As I posted today, it is possible to learn to love yourself with OCD, because if you hate OCD, that means you hate your brain. That means you hate yourself. And this is all we've got. So take the chance and really learn to work with it and have self-compassion and empathy for who you are with OCD.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's a couple like metaphors and analogies that come into my head, and I'm torn between which one to share. There's in ACT, there's the bus driver metaphor, and we are all the bus drivers of our own buses, which is our lives, you know. And OCD, or sessions, intrusive thoughts, they're the passengers on the bus, and sometimes they're shouting really loudly, they're standing on the chair, jumping up and down, screaming at you, trying to brake, trying to get you to change direction, maybe change bus, whatever it is. And also, we've got to remember that they can shout as loud as they want. They're not the ones with their hand on the steering wheel and their foot on the accelerator, or the gas pedal, as you Yanks say. We're in control of that at all times. And sometimes in my life, there's annoying people on my bus, being thoughts, that are trying to get me to turn around, change speed. And sometimes I falter, and I do. But a lot of the time I try and remember now that I'm in control of the bus. And then other times they're not even on the bus, and my bus is completely peaceful and I have a nice ride to wherever I'm going. But whether they're on the bus or not, they're not going to dictate where I'm going on that bus, if that makes sense.
Yes.
It's about learning that no matter how much it screams, it doesn't have any power over you.
I love that. That's a great metaphor to end on. Where can people find you, Stu?
Just the OCD Stories in any kind of platform, or Google's the easiest one. And obviously, if you listen to podcasts, iTunes, OCD Stories there. Any podcast app on Android, not Stitcher, that's not my favorite. Overcast is my favorite for I use it on the iPhone as well, but it's on the on Android if you're not on iTunes.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being here, Stu. You know, I just adore you. Love all of the stuff that you do. So really appreciate you taking the time out this week to do this.
No, likewise. And thank you for everything you do. Happy OCD week.
And thank you for listening. If you're looking for any of my stuff, go to YouTube at Chrissie Hodges, Pure OCD Advocate, Instagram at Pure O Chrissie. And if you're interested in peer support services or referral consultations, head on over to chrissiehodges.com or ocd.chrissie@gmail.com. Have a wonderful OCD Awareness Week. Yay! We'll see you later.
Bye.